Can you come to my wedding in a cheap suit? The groom asked mockingly, calling security to kick me out of my daughter's wedding. But the security guards froze, whispering, "We can't, he's a VIP." Everyone in the hall held their breath. Before we continue, please subscribe to the channel and leave a comment with the time you are currently at. Honestly, Eldon, where did you even find that suit? Some thrift store clearance rack? Martin's words hit me mid-sip of water, the crystal glass freezing halfway to my lips. I had walked into Christine's dining room 10 minutes ago, expecting polite introductions and pleasant conversation. Instead, I found myself seated across from a man whose second glass of wine had apparently loosened more than his tongue. Martin. Kristen's voice carried a sharp edge as she emerged from the kitchen, her arms laden with serving dishes. But Martin waved her concern away with a gesture that sent wine slushing dangerously close to the rim of his glass. No, sweetheart. I'm just being honest here. Your father seems like a decent enough fellow, but presentation matters. His gaze swept over me with the cold assessment of an appraiser evaluating damaged goods, especially for the wedding photos. People will be looking at those for years to come. The dining room's warm lighting suddenly felt harsh against my skin. Through the large windows, Beverly Hills sprawled in manicured perfection, each lawn a testament to wealth I had never aspired to display. My modest suit, purchased at a department store dress for $100 worn to countless formal judicial events, suddenly felt like a costume. "This suit is perfectly appropriate for formal occasions," I said, keeping my voice level despite the heat rising in my chest. Martin laughed, a sound like ice cracking. "App? I don't know what kind of events you attend." He leaned back in his chair, gesturing with his wine glass. "But when you're mixing with our circle, venture capitalists, tech executives, old money families, appearances matter. First impressions, you understand?" Kristen set down the dishes with more force than necessary, porcelain clinking against the mahogany table. "Dad's suit looks fine, Martin. Can we please just, I'm not trying to be cruel," Mart uninterrupted, his voice taking on a patronizing tone that made my jaw tighten. "I understand not everyone can afford quality tailoring. But surely you could have borrowed something. Ask Kristen for help choosing appropriate attire." The word borrowed hung in the air like smoke. In my 30 years on the bench, I had sentenced men whose arrogance palled in comparison to what I witnessed across this table. Martin's assumptions about my financial situation would have been amusing if they weren't delivered with such cutting precision. "You should focus on getting to know me rather than evaluating my wardrobe." Martin's eyes glittered with something that might have been amusement. "Oh, but the two are connected, aren't they? A man's clothes tell you everything about his station in life, his priorities, his circumstances." He took another long sip of wine, emboldened by alcohol and his perceived advantage. Kristen's mentioned, "You work in government, some sort of clerk position." The question landed like a physical blow. Kristen had kept my professional identity secret at my request. Too many years of dealing with people who treated judges differently had taught me the value of anonymity in personal relationships. But Martin's casual dismissal of my career, along with his assumption that I occupied some lowly bureaucratic role, revealed the depth of his prejudice. "Something like that," I replied. "Well, at least it's steady work," Martin said with the magnanimous air of someone offering charity, though I imagine the pay isn't much. "Government salaries, you know." He gestured around the dining room at the expensive artwork and crystal stemware. "This is what real success looks like, Eldon. Maybe I can give you some investment advice, help you build something for retirement." Kristen's face had gone pale, her hands twisted together in her lap. She opened her mouth to speak. But Martin continued his assault with the relentless momentum of a man convinced of his own superiority. "Actually, you know what? I'll handle the wedding expenses. All of them." He reached across the table and patted my hand with condescending familiarity. "No need for you to strain your budget trying to keep up with our standards. Think of it as my gift to Kristen, making sure her special day isn't compromised by financial limitations." The dining room fell silent except for the soft tick of an antique clock. Kristen's eyes filled with tears of embarrassment, her carefully planned evening crumbling around her, and Martin sat there wine-flushed and satisfied, waiting for my grateful response to his generous offer. Instead, I felt something cold and sharp crystallize in my chest, not anger that was too hot, too immediate. This was something else entirely. Recognition, perhaps the same feeling I experienced when evidence revealed the true nature of a defendant standing before my bench. "That's very thoughtful," I said quietly. Kristen suddenly pushed back from the table, her chair scraping against hardwood. "Martin, I think you should. Martin, you should go home now." Kristen's voice cut through the tension with surgical precision. Martin blinked, his wine-addled brain struggling to process her words. What? But we haven't even now. The single word carried enough authority to cut through his alcoholic haze. You've had too much to drink and you're being incredibly rude to my father. I watched Martin's face cycle through confusion, indignation, and finally a petulant acceptance that reminded me of certain defendants who never quite understood why their behavior had consequences. He pushed back from the table with exaggerated care, as if proving his sobriety through deliberate movements. Fine, if that's how you want it. He stood, swaying slightly, and reached for his jacket draped over a nearby chair. But honestly, Kristen, someone needed to address the elephant in the room. We can't pretend these differences don't matter. Kristen followed him to the front door, their voices carrying back in sharp whispers. I heard fragments of his defensive justifications and her embarrassed apologies. The front door closed with a definitive click, leaving the house in sudden quiet. When she returned to the dining room, her shoulders sagged with exhaustion. The confident marketing director who commanded boardroom presentations had been replaced by a daughter caught between two worlds, neither of which she could fully control. Dad, I'm so sorry. She sank into her chair, unable to meet my eyes. Martin isn't usually like this. The wine, combined with the stress from work, sometimes brings out his worst side. I watched her fidget with her engagement ring, the diamond catching light from the chandelier above. How many times had I seen this same gesture in my courtroom? The unconscious touching of wedding bands by spouses defending the indefensible, love wearing with dawning recognition. Kristen. I waited until she looked up. Have you ever mentioned anything about my work to him? Her brow furrowed. Your work? No, of course not. You asked me years ago not to tell anyone, remember? After that incident with Mom's sister trying to get you to fix her parking tickets, a memory surfaced. My late wife's sister cornering me at a family barbecue, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper as she slid a folder of citations across the patio table. The assumption that my position existed primarily to benefit family members had soured many relationships over the years. So he doesn't know what I do. I told him you work for the state. Some kind of administrative position. She looked down at her hands again. He didn't seem particularly interested in the details. Of course he hadn't. Martin's world operated on simple hierarchies with wealth at the top and everything else relegated to various levels of irrelevance. A government clerk rated barely above invisible in his social taxonomy. Good, I said quietly. Please keep it that way. Something in my tone made her look up sharply. Dad, you're not angry with me for not defending you more, are you? Because I wanted to. But sometimes it's easier to just let him. I'm not angry with you. The words came out softer than I intended. How could I explain that my concern wasn't wounded pride, but something far more troubling? That in 30 years of evaluating character from the bench, I had developed an instinct for recognizing dangerous narcissism. That Martin's casual cruelty tonight had revealed patterns that worried me more than any personal insult could. She reached across the table and took my hand. He's really not a bad person, Dad. He comes from this incredibly competitive world where everything is about status and positioning. Sometimes he forgets that not everyone operates in the same way. I squeezed her fingers gently. You don't need to explain him to me. But I feel like I do. Because I love him and I love you, and tonight was supposed to bring everyone together. Her voice broke slightly. Instead, it's just this mess. Looking at her face so much like her mother's when Margaret was troubled, I felt the familiar weight of parental protection. Not the hot anger that Martin's insults had provoked, but something deeper and more patient. A judge's instinct to gather evidence before rendering judgment. These things take time, I said, getting to know someone, understanding who they really are. It's a process. You'll give him another chance, though, when he's sober and properly apologetic. I nodded, though something in my chest had already shifted into a different mode entirely, professional, watchful. Of course, she smiled for the first time since Martin's departure, relief flooding her features. Thank you. I know once you really get to know each other. I squeezed her hand once more, then released it. I should head home. Early day tomorrow. As I gathered my jacket and keys, I noticed her watching me with the same careful attention she had shown as a child, trying to read my mood through facial expressions and body language. Some instincts never entirely disappeared, even in adulthood. Drive carefully, she said, walking me to the door. Always do. I kissed her forehead and stepped into the Beverly Hills evening, where perfect lawns stretched under perfect streetlights, everything manicured and controlled. My car sat at the curb like a modest interruption in the luxury landscape. Reliable but unremarkable, just like its owner. According to Martin Hargrove, the drive from Beverly Hills to Pasadena took me through the heart of Los Angeles, past the glittering towers of Century City and into the sprawling neighborhoods where real people lived real lives. Traffic moved steadily on the 110, headlights and taillights creating rivers of light in my rearview mirror. 45 minutes alone with my thoughts. 45 minutes to process what had just occurred. In my 3 decades on the bench, I had encountered every variation of human character imaginable. The desperate and the calculating, the genuinely remorseful, and the pathologically entitled. I had learned to read the subtle signs, the way someone's jaw tightened when confronted with evidence, the telltale pause before a carefully constructed lie, the particular kind of indignation that arose when privilege was questioned. Martin Hargrove displayed classic symptoms of narcissistic entitlement. The casual cruelty masked as helpful observation, the inability to consider how his words affected others, the assumption that financial success granted him moral authority to judge and dismiss those he considered beneath him. I had seen men like him before. They appeared in my courtroom wearing expensive suits and confident smiles, certain their wealth and connections would insulate them from consequences. They spoke to their victims with the same patronizing tone Martin had used with me tonight, as if poverty or modest circumstances were character flaws that justified any treatment. The worst part wasn't the insults themselves, but what they revealed about how he saw Kristen. To Martin, she was an acquisition from a lower social stratum, someone whose family needed to be managed and improved upon. His offer to pay for the wedding hadn't been a gesture of generosity. It had been a power play, establishing dominance through financial control. My exit approached, and I took the familiar curves that led toward my neighborhood. Pasadena's tree-lined streets felt like a sanctuary after Beverly Hills's pristine intimidation. Here, modest homes sat comfortably beside larger ones without apology. Here, a man's worth wasn't measured by his thread count. I pulled into my driveway and sat for a moment before cutting the engine. The house looked exactly as I had left it, small, well-maintained, unpretentious. 3 bedrooms, 2 bathrooms, a study lined with law books and family photographs. Margaret had planted the roses that still bloomed by the front porch, their scent carrying memories of Saturday mornings spent in companionable silence, each of us lost in our own sections of the newspaper. Inside, I went through my evening routines that had become automatic over the years. My jacket hung in the closet, keys on the kitchen counter, a glass of water from the tap, and no crystal stemware was needed. In my study, surrounded by volumes of legal precedents and judicial opinions, I finally allowed myself to consider the full implications of the evening. Kristen loved Martin Hargrove. She had accepted his proposal, planned their future together, chosen to bind her life to his. Those were facts that couldn't be changed by parental disapproval or judicial analysis of character. But facts could evolve. People revealed themselves gradually, and sometimes those revelations changed everything. I had no intention of interfering with my daughter's relationship based on one unpleasant evening. That would be premature and potentially destructive, but neither would I ignore what I had witnessed. Martin's mask had slipped tonight, revealing glimpses of something darker beneath his polished exterior. The imaginative play, the judicial approach, was to observe and document. Let time reveal patterns. Allow Martin enough rope to either prove my concerns unfounded or demonstrate that they were entirely justified. I had learned patience from 30 years of letting evidence accumulate before rendering judgment. Some cases developed slowly, each hearing adding another piece to the puzzle until the whole picture emerged with undeniable clarity. This would be no different. I settled into my reading chair, the same leather recliner where I had studied case law for decades, where I had read bedtime stories to a young Christian, where I had grieved Margaret's passing and slowly rebuilt my life around solitude and duty. Tomorrow would bring new possibilities. Perhaps Martin would call to apologize, his conscience finally asserting itself through his hangover. Possibly Kristen would phone to discuss the evening, seeking reassurance or guidance. Or maybe nothing would happen at all, and life would continue its steady progression toward their wedding day. Whatever came, I would be ready. The house settled around me with familiar creaks and sigh, a modest sanctuary filled with books and memories, and the quiet satisfaction of a life lived with purpose. Outside, Los Angeles continued to exude its restless energy, with millions of people pursuing their dreams and ambitions, and carefully constructed facades. In courtrooms across the city, Judges were reviewing cases, preparing for tomorrow's proceedings, weighing evidence and precedent in pursuit of justice. The work continued as it always had, as it always would, and sometimes, however, not often, but sometimes, justice found ways to assert itself outside the formal structures of law and order, in the patient spaces where truth eventually emerged from the shadows. I closed my eyes and let the day's tension drain away, already planning tomorrow with a methodical precision that had served me well throughout my career. Time would tell what kind of man Martin Harrove really was. The phone shrill ring cut through Saturday morning, quiet like a blade. I looked up from my newspaper, coffee cup halfway to my lips, and checked the clock. 10:30 seemed an unusual time for social calls. "Hello, Eldon, it's Martin." The voice carried traces of hangover, rough edges that wine had smoothed away the night before. "Listen, I need to apologize for last evening. I had too much to drink and I said some inappropriate things." I sat down my coffee and leaned back in my study chair, surrounded by law books that had witnessed 3 decades of careful deliberation. "It's all right, Martin. I understand these things happen. Thank you for being so gracious about it." Relief flooded his voice, the tone of a man who had worried about consequences overnight. "Kristen was quite upset with me after you left. She made it very clear that I had crossed some lines." Through my study window, Saturday morning spread across Pasadena in comfortable ordinariness. Neighbors walked dogs, children played in yards, normal people living everyday lives without the complications of wedding politics and family dynamics. "She's protective," I said. "Always has been." "Yes, that's actually why I'm calling." Martin's voice gained confidence, the apology apparently clearing his conscience for whatever came next. "I've been thinking about the whole situation, and while I regret my delivery last night, the underlying concern remains valid." Something cold settled in my stomach. "Which concern is that?" "The suit, Eldon. Look, I know I was harsh about it, but there's going to be some very elite guests at this wedding. Tech executives, venture capitalists, old California families. First impressions matter enormously in these circles." I watched a neighbor's cat stalk through my backyard roses, patient and focused on something I couldn't see. Predator behavior had its own logic and its own inevitable progression. "It's a perfectly respectable suit, Martin, but that's just it. Decent isn't the standard we're aiming for here." His voice took on the patient tone of someone explaining obvious truth to a slow child. "This is a $200,000 wedding, Eldon. The photography alone costs more than most people earn in a month. Every detail has to be perfect. $200,000. The number hung in the air like smoke, carrying implications about values and priorities that made my modest home suddenly feel like a different universe entirely. "I appreciate your concern. Here's what I'm thinking," Martin interrupted, his voice warming with the enthusiasm of someone solving problems for lesser beings. "There's a Men's Wearhouse downtown. Nothing too expensive, but they carry suits that would be more appropriate for the occasion. I could even go with you, help you pick something out. Make sure the fit is right. The color works with the wedding palette." The cat in my garden had frozen in perfect stillness, every muscle coiled for the strike. Nature's patience in service of inevitable conclusion. "That's very thoughtful, but I'll be wearing the suit I own." Silence stretched across the phone line. When Martin spoke again, his voice had hardened with the particular frustration of someone accustomed to getting their way. "Eldon, I'm trying to be diplomatic about this, but let me be completely clear. This wedding is essential to me, crucial to my career, my reputation, and my future as my in-laws are flying in from Connecticut. I cannot have Christine's father looking like he shops at discount stores. It's a $100 suit from a department store, but it's quality." Martin's laugh carried no humor whatsoever. "My cufflinks cost more than that. Look, I'm trying to help you here, but there are limits to how much accommodation I can make. If you show up in that suit, you're not coming through those doors. Entry will be forbidden." The words landed with the force of ultimatum, not a request, not even a demand. A command backed by the absolute certainty of someone who had never been told no, by people he considered beneath him. In 30 years on the bench, I had heard threats delivered with more subtlety and less venom than what Martin Harrove had just laid across my kitchen table on a Saturday morning. The mask hadn't just slipped. It had shattered completely, revealing something uglier than I had imagined possible. "I see." My voice remained steady despite the rage building behind my ribs. "Thank you for clarifying your position. Good. I'm glad we understand each other. The Men's Wearhouse on Wilshire opens at 10 Kyle. We could meet there this afternoon if I hung up." The receiver settled into its cradle with a soft click, followed by the profound silence of my study. Law books stared down from their shelves like silent witnesses to what had just transpired. Outside, the neighbor's cat had completed its hunt and disappeared into shadow, leaving only the roses swaying in morning breeze. My hand remained on the phone for a long moment, feeling the cool plastic against my palm, while Martin's words echoed in memory with crystalline clarity. Entry will be forbidden. The dial tone buzzed against my ear for several seconds before I finally lifted my hand from the receiver. The silence that followed felt dense, weighted with implications that would have seemed impossible 24 hours earlier. I stood slowly, joints protesting the sudden movement, and walked to my study window. The neighbor's cat had vanished, but evidence of its hunt remained. A few scattered feathers near the rose bushes. Nature's casual brutality displayed against Margaret's carefully tended garden. Entry will be forbidden. 3 decades of judicial experience had taught me to recognize threats in all their variations. The crude intimidation of street criminals, the sophisticated manipulation of white-collar defendants, the cold calculation of those who wielded power without conscience. Martin Hargrove's ultimatum contained elements of all three wrapped in the veneer of social propriety. But what struck me most wasn't the threat itself. It was the casual certainty behind it. Martin genuinely believed he possessed the authority to dictate terms to me, to exclude me from my own daughter's wedding, based on the thread count of my clothing. More disturbing still, he assumed I would either comply or slink away in shame, too intimidated by his wealth and connections to challenge him. I moved through my house slowly, seeing it through new eyes. The modest furniture that Margaret and I had chosen together, the family photographs clustered on end tables, the kitchen where we had shared 30 years of morning coffee and evening conversation. Everything suddenly felt fragile, as if Martin's worldview could somehow contaminate the spaces where I had built my life. In the hallway leading to my bedroom, I stopped before a photograph of Margaret taken 2 years before her passing. She wore the expression I remembered best, patient amusement at human foolishness, the look of someone who had seen enough of life to find most drama ultimately absurd. "What would you think of all this?" I asked her image quietly, but I already knew Margaret had possessed an unerring instinct for character, could spot narcissism and cruelty beneath polished surfaces with the precision of a surgeon. She would have seen through Martin Hargrove in the first 5 minutes of conversation. More importantly, she would have been disappointed in me if I let him win. I continued to my bedroom and opened the closet door. There, hanging beside my casual clothes and judicial robes, was the contested suit, a navy wool classic cut, was purchased from Nordstrom during a rare shopping expedition 2 years ago. It had served me well at formal events, earning compliments from colleagues and photographing respectably at judicial ceremonies. $100 Martin's cufflinks cost more. I lifted the suit from its hanger and held it up to the bedroom window, examining it in natural light. The fabric showed no signs of wear. The tailoring remained sharp. The color as rich as the day I bought it. By any reasonable standard, it was entirely appropriate for wedding festivities. But Martin Hargrove didn't operate by reasonable standards. His world operated on different rules, with hierarchies of wealth and status that granted some people the right to judge others, to determine who belonged and who should be excluded. In his universe, I wasn't Kristen's father deserving of respect. I was a problem to be managed, a source of potential embarrassment to be controlled or eliminated. I hung the suit back in its place and closed the closet door. The decision forming in my mind felt as inevitable as that neighbor's cat completing its hunt. Not born from anger, though anger certainly existed. Not driven by wounded pride, though my pride had indeed been wounded. This was something else entirely, a recognition that some behaviors required consequences, and some attitudes demanded correction. For 30 years, I had observed human nature from the bench with the detached analysis of a scientist studying specimens. I had learned to separate emotion from judgment, personal feelings from professional responsibility. The skills that made me an effective judge would serve me well in what was coming. Martin Hargrove had made a fundamental miscalculation. He had assumed that his wealth granted him immunity from accountability, that his social connections insulated him from consequences. He was about to discover how wrong he was. I walked back to my study and sat down in my reading chair, the same chair where I had prepared for countless cases, where I had written opinions that shaped legal precedent, with which I had wrestled for 3 decades over questions of justice and punishment. The wedding was exactly 1 month away, 30 days to let Martin's arrogance solidify into overconfidence. 30 days for him to spread word of his ultimatum among those elite guests he was so eager to impress. 30 days for him to forget that actions, even those targeted at humble government clerks, sometimes carried unexpected consequences. I picked up my newspaper and settled back into Saturday morning routine. But everything had changed. The man reading about local politics and sports scores was no longer just Kristen's father, hoping for the best with her fiancé. He was a judge preparing to render verdict. The weeks that followed moved with deceptive normalcy. April slipped into May while Los Angeles settled into its familiar rhythm of sunshine and traffic. Another season in a city that treated weather like background music, always pleasant, rarely memorable. I maintained my judicial schedule with the same precision that had defined 3 decades on the bench. Morning coffee at 6, arrival at the courthouse by 7:30, and the afternoon session will stretch until 5:00. Colleagues noticed nothing unusual in my demeanor, no deviation from the measured thoughtfulness that had become my professional trademark. At home, I prepared for Kristen's wedding with the methodical care of someone organizing case files, verifying RSVPs, finalizing gift selections, and confirming transportation arrangements. Every detail handled with judicial thoroughness, though beneath the surface different preparations were taking shape. Kristen called twice during those weeks, her voice bright with bridal excitement, as she described final dress fittings and floral arrangements. She never mentioned Martin's phone call to me, which meant either he hadn't told her about it, or she had chosen not to discuss it. Given his need to maintain his image as the magnanimous future son-in-law, I suspected the former. The invitations had arrived in my mailbox during the 3rd week of April. Heavy cardstock embossed with gold lettering, the kind of stationery that announced its expense through tactile luxury. Mr. and Mrs. James Hargrove requests the pleasure of your company. The Beverly Wilshire Hotel Ballroom. Cocktails at 6, dinner at 7, dancing until midnight. $200,000 condensed into elegant script and premium paper stock. I hung the invitation on my refrigerator next to grocery lists and court schedules, a daily reminder of what was approaching. Each morning I studied it while drinking my coffee, noting details that would matter when the time came. The timeline, the location, and the formal dress code, which made no mention of specific suit requirements or entry restrictions based on clothing budgets. My own preparations took different forms. I researched the Beverly Wilshire's layout, studied photographs of its ballroom and adjacent spaces, familiarized myself with the hotel's operational procedures. Information gathered with the same thoroughness I brought to reviewing case law, building a complete picture of the terrain where this would unfold. The contested suit hung in my closet like evidence in a criminal case, material proof of the central issue that would determine the outcome of the evening. I examined it regularly, ensuring it remained in perfect condition, that no wrinkle or stain could provide Martin with additional ammunition for his position. $100. The price tag had long since been removed, but the number remained fixed in my memory as a symbol of everything Martin found inadequate about my life. In his world, value correlated directly with cost, worth measured by price tags rather than character or achievement. 3 nights before the wedding, I sat in my study, reviewing the guest list Kristen had shared weeks earlier. Tech entrepreneurs, venture capital partners, and old money families from both coasts, the kind of people Martin was desperate to impress. The audience he wanted to ensure never witnessed anything that might diminish his carefully constructed image. I wondered how many of them knew about his ultimatum to me. Had he shared it as an amusing anecdote, the story of putting his future father-in-law in his place? Did they approve of his methods, or would they find his behavior distasteful if they knew the whole truth? Soon those questions would have answers. The evening before the wedding, I followed my usual routine with unusual precision. Dinner at 6, grilled salmon and vegetables, nothing that might cause discomfort the following day. Television news at 7, watching reporters discuss local politics and national events with the same earnest authority they brought to weather forecasts and traffic updates. At 9 I climbed the stairs to my bedroom and opened my closet door. The navy suit waited in its designated place, pressed and ready, looking exactly as it had the day I purchased it. $100 of department store craftsmanship that had somehow become the central battleground in a war I hadn't chosen, but fully intended to win. I laid out my clothes for morning: shirt, tie, shoes, the contested suit jacket, and trousers. Everything arranged with the care of someone preparing for a significant occasion, which this certainly was, though not in the way Kristen had envisioned when she sent her invitations. My alarm clock ticked toward 10 p.m. as I settled into bed, surrounded by the familiar comfort of my modest bedroom. Outside, Los Angeles continued its restless energy. Millions of people pursuing their Saturday night entertainment in venues ranging from dive bars to five-star restaurants. Tomorrow, the Beverly Wilshire would host another elegant wedding. Another celebration of love and commitment between two people who promised to honor each other through whatever challenges life might bring. Martin Hargrove was about to discover that some challenges arrived wearing $100 suits and carrying 30 years of judicial wisdom about the relationship between actions and consequences. 6:45, my alarm hadn't needed to wake me. I'd been lying in bed since 5:30, watching morning light creep across the ceiling with the patience of someone who had waited 30 days for this moment. Wedding day. I rose without ceremony and padded to the bathroom, catching my reflection in the mirror above the sink. 65 years looked back at me, lines earned through decades of listening to testimony, weighing evidence, dispensing justice, the face of a man who understood that consequences delayed were not consequences denied. The shower ran hot while I shaved with deliberate precision, each stroke of the razor removing yesterday's stubble and preparing me for what lay ahead. No nervousness disturbed my hands. This was simply another morning requiring professional preparation. Like countless others that had preceded significant courtroom moments, breakfast consisted of toast and coffee consumed while standing at my kitchen counter. Through the window, Saturday morning unfolded in suburban tranquility. Neighbors walking dogs, sprinklers watering lawns, and normal people beginning their regular weekends. In a few hours, the Beverly Wilshire would host an elegant celebration of love and commitment, attended by Los Angeles's social and financial elite. Martin Hargrove expected me to be absent from that celebration. His ultimatum had been clear: wear appropriate attire or stay home. The arrogance of assumed compliance had sustained him through the past month, confident that his threat had resolved the problem of Kristen's embarrassing father. Today he would discover his miscalculation. I climbed the stairs to my bedroom and opened the closet door. There, hanging exactly where it had waited for 30 days, was the contested suit, navy wool, classic cut, $100 of department store, craftsmanship that had somehow become the central battleground in a war about respect, dignity, and the dangerous assumption that wealth granted authority over others. I lifted the jacket from its hanger and held it to the light. The fabric remained impeccable, the tailoring still sharp after 2 years of formal occasions. By any reasonable standard, it was entirely appropriate for wedding festivities. But Martin Hargrove didn't operate by reasonable standards. The shirt came first, crisp white cotton, properly pressed, then the trousers settled into familiar comfort around my waist. The tie followed, knotted with the same precision I brought to writing judicial opinions. Each element of my attire assembled with ritual significance, armor for the confrontation that had been inevitable since that first insulting dinner conversation. Finally, the jacket. As I slid my arms into the sleeves, I felt the transformation complete itself. Not from civilian to formal attendee, but from injured father to dispensing judge. The suit didn't just clothe me. It announced my intentions to anyone perceptive enough to recognize the symbolism. Before leaving, I stood before my bedroom mirror and conducted a final inspection. Everything was perfect. The suit fit impeccably. The colors complemented each other. The overall impression was one of quiet dignity and appropriate formality. Anyone encountering me would see a well-dressed gentleman attending a significant social occasion. They would be entirely correct, though perhaps not in the way they anticipated. I collected my keys and wallet, checking that Kristen's invitation remained safely tucked in my jacket pocket. The heavy cardstock with its gold embossing had become my admission ticket to what promised to be a memorable afternoon at one of Los Angeles's most prestigious venues. My car started on the first turn of the key, reliable as always. As I backed out of my driveway and pointed toward the freeway that would carry me into Beverly Hills, I felt the same calm focus that had sustained me through 3 decades of significant courtroom moments. Justice delayed was not justice denied. Sometimes it was simply justice refined, made more precise through patience and careful planning. The drive to Beverly Wilshire took 45 minutes through weekend traffic that moved with surprising efficiency. Los Angeles seemed eager to clear the path for what was to come. as if the city itself recognized the importance of allowing all participants to reach their appointed destinations on schedule. The Beverly Wilshire rose before me like a monument to elegance, its cream-colored facade gleaming in afternoon sunlight. Valet attendants in spotless uniforms moved with choreographed precision, directing luxury vehicles toward parking areas with the efficiency of conductors, managing an expensive orchestra. I surrendered my modest sedan to a young man who handled it with the same professional courtesy he had shown the Bentley ahead of me. Money talked, but good service spoke universally. Inside the hotel's lobby spread in marble magnificence, crystal chandeliers casting rainbow patterns across surfaces that reflected 2 centuries of hospitality to the wealthy and powerful. Wedding guests moved through the space in elegant clusters, their voices carrying the particular resonance of people accustomed to being heard and heeded. The ballroom doors stood open, revealing glimpses of white flowers and golden light within. A string quartet played chamber music, providing a sophisticated background to the murmur of arriving attendees. Everything Martin had promised was elegance, exclusivity, the kind of social theater that impressed venture capitalists and tech executives. And there, near the altar, draped in cascading orchids, stood my daughter. Kristen's wedding dress transformed her into something luminous, ivory silk flowing around her like captured moonlight. Margaret would have wept to see her looking so radiant, so perfectly beautiful on the day she had dreamed about since childhood. For a moment, my careful composure threatened to crack under the weight of paternal pride and bittersweet memory. She turned, scanning the gathering crowd, and her face brightened when she spotted me. That smile, Margaret's smile, warm and welcoming and completely innocent of the drama about to unfold, nearly undid my resolve entirely. "Dad?" She moved toward me with careful, graceful movements, managing her dress train with practiced skill. "You look wonderful. That suit is perfect." Perfect. The word carried layers of meaning she couldn't possibly understand. "You're breathtaking, sweetheart. Absolutely gorgeous. Thank you for being here. I know this isn't really your kind of thing. All these people in formality. But it means everything to me that Eldon Martin's voice cut through our reunion like a blade through silk. He approached with the confident stride of a man on his own territory, surrounded by his own carefully curated guests. The months since our phone conversation had done nothing to soften his edges. If anything, he seemed more polished, more certain of his authority. His eyes immediately fixed on my suit with laser intensity. The same navy wool that had triggered his ultimatum, the same $100 department store purchase that had offended his sensibilities so deeply. I watched recognition dawn in his expression, followed quickly by something that might have been disbelief. "I warned you about that suit," he said quietly, his voice pitched to avoid Christine's hearing. "Martin, let's not spoil Christine's day with unnecessary drama." "Unnecessary?" His face flushed with the particular indignation of someone whose authority had been challenged. "I made my position crystal clear. We discussed this. You assured me you understood." Kristen looked between us with growing alarm. "What's going on, Martin? What are you talking about?" But Martin wasn't finished. His voice rose slightly, drawing glances from nearby guests who had turned to observe what appeared to be developing tension near the altar. "You didn't listen to me, Eldon. You chose to ignore my explicit instructions about appropriate attire for this event." His eyes swept over my appearance with undisguised contempt. "Now there will be consequences." The word hung in the air between us like a challenge thrown down before witnesses. Around us, elegant conversations had quieted as more guests noticed the confrontation brewing at the center of their social gathering. Kristen stepped forward, her voice sharp with confusion and embarrassment. "Martin, stop this right now. What are you? Stay out of this, sweetheart." Martin's tone carried the dismissive edge of someone managing lesser beings. "Your father and I have an understanding that needs clarification." He looked around the ballroom with calculating eyes, clearly searching for something or someone who could help him enforce his will. His gaze swept across the assembled guests, including tech executives, venture capital partners, and old money families from both coasts, before settling on the discreet security personnel stationed near the room's entrances. A predatory smile crossed his face as he spotted what he was looking for. Martin raised his hand with the imperious gesture of someone accustomed to commanding immediate attention. Across the ballroom, a tall man in a dark suit noticed the signal and began moving in our direction with professional purpose. Security. Martin's voice carried enough authority to turn heads throughout the gathered crowd. I need you to remove this man from the venue immediately. The approaching figure wore that understated elegance of high-end private security, expensive suit, discreet earpiece, the controlled posture of someone trained to handle delicate situations involving wealthy clients. As he drew closer, I could see the name tag identifying him as Victor Reyes, head of security. Conversations throughout the ballroom had stopped entirely now. Tech executives and venture capitalists turned to observe the drama unfolding near the altar, their faces showing the particular fascination of people witnessing social theater they hadn't paid to see. What seems to be the problem, sir? Victor's voice carried professional calm as he assessed the situation with trained eyes. This man, Martin, gestured at me with dismissive contempt, had been specifically told not to attend the event, wearing inappropriate attire. He chose to ignore those instructions. I want him removed from the premises. Kristen's face had gone pale, her hands trembling as she processed what was happening. Martin, you can't be serious. This is my father. Your father should have listened when I explained the dress requirements. Martin's voice had taken on the particular coldness of someone demonstrating power in front of an audience. I'm paying $200,000 for this wedding. I will not have it compromised by someone who refuses to meet basic social standards. Victor's professional gaze shifted from Martin to me, conducting the kind of assessment that security personnel performed dozens of times a day. His eyes took in my navy suit, my modest appearance, my calm demeanor in the face of public humiliation. Then something shifted in his expression. I'm sorry, sir, Victor said to Martin, his tone remaining respectful but firm. I cannot remove this gentleman from the premises. Martin blinked, clearly expecting immediate compliance. What do you mean you can't? I'm the client here. This is my wedding. I understand that, sir, but this gentleman is a VIP guest. Hotel policy prohibits any action that might inconvenience someone of his standing. The word standing carried weight that confused Martin entirely. He looked between Victor and me with growing bewilderment, as if the security chief had started speaking a foreign language. VIP guest? What are you talking about? Look at him. Martin's voice rose in frustrated disbelief. He's wearing a $100 suit. He works some clerk job in government. What possible standing could he have? Victor's expression shifted into something that might have been professional amusement. Sir, I'm not at liberty to discuss the specifics of our VIP guest arrangements, but I can assure you that, Mr. He paused, looking at me with prominent recognition. Mills, I supplied quietly. Mr. Mills is absolutely welcome at any event held in this hotel. Victor's tone had taken on a subtle edge, suggesting that Martin was venturing into dangerous territory. In fact, I recommend against any further complications regarding his presence. Martin's face had flushed deep red, his confidence beginning to crack under the unexpected resistance. This is ridiculous. I don't care what your policy is. I'm paying for this event, and the hotel appreciates your business, sir. But sure, guests receive accommodations that supersede individual event arrangements. Victor's stance had subtly shifted, his professional calm now carrying undertones of warning. I suggest we allow the ceremony to proceed as planned. The gathered crowd watched in fascination as Martin's authority crumbled in real time. His assumptions about power and influence meeting immovable resistance from someone who clearly knew things he didn't. Who is he? Martin demanded, his voice cracking with confusion and mounting panic. What aren't you telling me? Martin's face had turned a dangerous shade of crimson, veins standing out against his temples as he jabbed his finger at Victor with escalating fury. This is entirely unacceptable. I don't care about your hotel policies. I'm the paying customer here. Victor's stance shifted into something more alert. Professional calm giving way to visible preparation. Sir, I'm going to need you to step outside and calm down. Step outside? Martin's voice cracked with disbelief. This is my wedding. I paid $200,000 for this venue. You work for me today? The security chief's expression hardened into something that suggested Martin had crossed an important line. Actually, sir, I work for the hotel, and hotel policy is very clear about guests who become disruptive to other patrons. Around us, the elegant wedding crowd had formed a loose circle, their conversations forgotten as they watched the drama unfold with the fascinated horror of people witnessing a social disaster in real time. Tech executives and venture capitalists who had come to celebrate now found themselves front-row witnesses to their host's complete meltdown. You cannot remove me from my own wedding. Martin lunged toward Victor, his coordination compromised by rage and the remnants of pre-ceremony champagne. I'll take care of your job for this. I'll sue this entire hotel chain. Victor moved with the fluid precision of someone trained in restraint techniques. In one smooth motion, he caught Martin's arm, twisted it behind his back with professional efficiency, and began guiding him toward the ballroom's exit. Let go of me. This is assault. I'll have you arrested. Martin's voice rose to near hysteria as he struggled against Victor's grip. Do you have any idea who I am? What connections I have in this city? I know exactly who you are, sir. Victor's tone remained professionally neutral, even as he applied additional pressure to maintain control. You need to leave this venue immediately. The crowd parted like water as Victor escorted his struggling captive toward the garden doors. Martin's expensive tuxedo had become rumpled, his carefully styled hair disheveled, his face flushed with impotent rage. The transformation from a confident groom to a public spectacle had taken less than 5 minutes. This isn't over, Martin shouted as Victor pushed him through the doorway into the hotel's garden courtyard. I'll sue every one of you. The hotel, the security company, everyone. Kristen followed behind them, her wedding dress trailing across marble floors as she tried to process what was happening to her carefully planned celebration. The other guests streamed after them, drawn by the magnetic pole of unfolding drama. In the courtyard, surrounded by manicured landscaping and elegant fountain features, Martin's voice carried even louder than before. You have no idea what kind of legal trouble you're in. I'll own this place when my lawyers are finished. Victor maintained his professional grip while scanning the gathering crowd with alert eyes. Sir, if you continue making threats, I'll have to call the police. Call them, call everyone. Martin's voice had reached a pitch that suggested complete loss of control. When they find out what you've done, assaulting a paying customer, violating my civil rights, you'll all be finished. The wedding guests formed a semicircle around the spectacle. Their faces showed a mix of embarrassment, fascination, and growing concern. This was no longer just disrupted nuptials. It had become something approaching public breakdown. But Martin wasn't finished. Standing there in his rumpled tuxedo, held firmly by hotel security, he continued his tirade with the desperate energy of someone whose entire worldview was crumbling. I'll sue all of you, he screamed, spittle flying from his lips. Every single person who thinks they can treat me this way. Starting with that man. He gestured wildly toward where I stood, calmly watching, and his ridiculous $100 suit. Let's see you try suing the Chief Justice of the California Supreme Court. The voice cut through Martin's ranting with surgical precision. Elena Vasquez stepped forward from the crowd, her elegant silver hair catching sunlight as she moved with the confident stride of someone accustomed to commanding courtrooms. Martin's mouth opened and closed soundlessly, his tirade stopping mid-sentence as if someone had pulled his power cord. Around us, the wedding guests fell into complete silence, processing what they had just heard. Chief Justice, Martin's voice came out as barely a whisper. Elena smiled with the particular satisfaction of someone delivering a perfectly timed revelation. Judge Eldon Mills, Chief Justice of the California Supreme Court, the highest judicial officer in the state. She gestured toward me with evident respect. I've had the honor of arguing cases before his court for 15 years. The color drained from Martin's face as the magnitude of his situation began to sink in. His eyes darted between Elna and me, his brain apparently struggling to reconcile the modest man in the $100 suit with the title he had just learned. Chief Justice, he repeated, his voice cracking. But he's the most respected judge in California. Elena finished smoothly, known for his wisdom, his fairness, and his absolute integrity. Someone whose reputation in legal circles is beyond reproach. Victor released Martin's arm, stepping back as the fight went out of his captive entirely. Martin stood there swaying slightly, his expensive tuxedo wrinkled, his carefully constructed image lying in ruins around him. Eldon. Martin turned toward me with desperate eyes. Your Honor, forgive me. I didn't know. I never would have. Wouldn't have what? I asked quietly. Insulted my appearance. Threatened to exclude me from my daughter's wedding. Demanded I prove my worth through expensive clothing. Each question landed like a physical blow. Martin flinched visibly, his mouth working as he searched for words that might somehow undo the past month of arrogance and cruelty. I was wrong, he whispered. Completely wrong. Please, Your Honor, I'll do anything to make this right. The suit, it looks fine. Perfect even. I don't know what I was thinking. The wedding guests watched this exchange with rapt attention, clearly beginning to piece together the full story of what had led to this moment. Tech executives who had come to network found themselves witnessing a masterclass in justice and humility. The suit was never the real issue, I said, my voice carrying the measured tone I used in judicial pronouncements. Character matters more than clothing, Martin. Issues of respect more than wealth. Yes, absolutely. You're right. Martin nodded frantically, desperation making him agree with anything that might reduce his humiliation. I understand that now. Please, how can I fix this? I glanced around at the gathered crowd, then back at the man whose prejudices had created this entire situation. The moment felt familiar, delivering judgment after careful deliberation, ensuring the lesson would be remembered. You can start by apologizing to Kristen, I said quietly. She's the one whose wedding day you've disrupted with your behavior. She's the one who deserves your genuine remorse. Martin turned toward his bride, who stood frozen in her ivory dress, tears streaming down her face as she processed the full scope of what had unfolded. The day she had dreamed about since childhood had become a public spectacle of her fiancé's character flaws. Kristen, I'm so sorry, Martin began, his voice breaking. I never meant for, but I could see in Kristen's eyes that mere apologies wouldn't be enough. The damage ran deeper than disrupted ceremonies. She had witnessed something fundamental about the man she had promised to marry, seeing him at his worst when pressure revealed his true nature. The crowd remained silent, waiting to see how this drama would resolve itself. Before Martin could continue his apology, I stepped forward and gently took the microphone from the string quartet stand. The courtyard fell completely silent as every guest turned their attention toward me. Friends, I began, my voice carrying the calm authority that had served me well through 3 decades on the bench. Today we've all witnessed something important unfold, a lesson that I hope will stay with each of us. The crowd shifted closer, sensing that something significant was about to be shared. Even Martin stopped his frantic apologizing to listen. For 30 years I've sat in judgment of human behavior. I've seen how people reveal their true character under pressure, how they treat those they consider beneath them, how they use power when they think no one of importance is watching. I paused, looking around at the gathered faces. Tech executives, venture capitalists, old money families, all hanging on my words. Today, my future son-in-law made the mistake of judging me by the price of my clothing rather than the content of my character. He assumed that because I didn't display wealth, I was somehow less worthy of respect. My voice remained steady, judicial. This is a dangerous assumption that can lead to hazardous behavior. Kristen stepped closer, tears still streaming down her face, but her expression showing something that might have been pride breaking through her distress. The accurate measure of a person isn't found in their bank account or their wardrobe. It's evident in how they treat service workers, how they speak to family members, and how they behave when they believe there are no consequences for their actions. Martin stood frozen, his face ashen as my words laid bare the full scope of his moral failing in front of everyone who mattered to him professionally and socially. Character is revealed not in moments of triumph, but in moments of pressure. Not when we're surrounded by equals, but when we encounter those we mistakenly believe to be our inferiors. The applause started slowly from Elena and a few other legal professionals in the crowd, who understood the weight of what they had witnessed. It built steadily as others joined in, recognizing wisdom when they heard it. So let this be a lesson for all of us, I concluded, my voice carrying across the courtyard with the resonance of someone accustomed to being heard. Judge others not by their possessions, but by their actions. Respect is earned through character, not purchased through commerce. The applause reached a crescendo as guests who had come for a wedding found themselves witnesses to something far more meaningful, a moment of genuine moral instruction delivered by someone uniquely qualified to provide it. When the applause died down, I handed the microphone back and walked over to Kristen. She fell into my arms, her wedding dress rustling as she held me tight. I'm so proud of you, Dad, she whispered through her tears. You handled this perfectly. Around us, the wedding guests began to disperse, their conversations animated with discussion of what they had just witnessed. Some approached to introduce themselves, expressing appreciation for the lesson they had received. Martin stood alone near the fountain, his earlier arrogance completely deflated. The man who had threatened to exclude me from the wedding now found himself isolated at his own celebration, his true character fully exposed to everyone who mattered in his professional and social circles. Justice, I reflected, sometimes served itself in the most unexpected ways. The $100 suit had proven its worth far beyond Martin's limited imagination, not through price tags but through the principles it had helped defend. The wedding could now proceed, though it would do so with a very different understanding of who commanded respect in that elegant courtyard. If you like this story, please like this video, subscribe to the channel, and share your impressions of this story in the comments. To listen to the next story, click on the box on the left. Thank you for watching.